Welcome to Planting Joy Garden. It is a beautiful 59-degree day in February, and I'm in Zone 5B. So this is truly a delight. And I'm really tempted to get out there and start working in the garden. But before you do any work in the garden, you have to realize there is more winter to come. So, I want to talk about a few things we can do to scratch that gardening itch without causing any problems later on in our growing season. We don't want to start planting too early because there's the risk of stunting the growth of your seedlings. And there's a chance that another hard frost could come along and kill them. So let's discuss some things we can do to satisfy our gardening itch until it's time to plant. So, one thing we can do is prepare beds. So, any bed that needs to be cleaned out of debris, as in the case of my leftover kale, it's a great time to just cut those stalks away. If your soil levels are low, this is a great time to get some of that compost that you've been making all winter long uh, and top off your beds. And I'll probably do that. I cannot actually mix any compost in, but I can lay some compost on the top. So if let's see. Now this is a raised bed and it is frozen at about 2 inches in depth. So of course I can't do much here. All I can do is perhaps add additional compost and get rid of some of these really big leaf covering and use this leaf covering to recover my new layer of compost. So that's one thing we can do in preparation for spring. These don't want to come out. It's fighting me. All right, and I'll let the roots rot in place or at least decompose a little bit. And in the case of this bed, it's an elevated raised bed. So I put my row cover, adding row cover in an elevated bed. This will be probably one of the first beds to defrost. I actually put the row cover on yesterday, hoping to defrost the soil. Now, at this time, there are very few things that you can actually plant. One of those things would be something like tatsoi or spinach. Those are seeds that can germinate in temperatures as low as 45 degrees. And I'm talking about soil temperatures as low as 45 degrees. So once you've added compost, brought your soil levels up, you can start warming or defrosting your elevated beds. Because they are elevated off the ground, there's more sun exposure, they're most likely to be the beds to defrost. Some of the other beds that are more difficult will be your raised beds, and of course, your in ground planting areas will probably be the last area to defrost simply because it's such a large mass of soil that has to be defrosted. Another thing I like to do is check on my perennials. I want to make sure there's some sign of life. So I see here that my strawberries, their crowns are very much alive, which is a great sign. Okay. And we'll head over and take a look at my bunching onions. I cut these down, covered them up, and I can see here that I have some green and they are regrowing. Okay, so I think at this point, I'm not quite ready to leave them open totally to the air. So I will be placing some leaves over them. until later in the season. So my bunchen onions made it. This is also a great time just to check and make sure that my winter sowing containers are staying nice and moist. So they're looking pretty good. Of course, I don't expect to see any germination as of yet. Just want to make sure that I'm keeping the moisture, and I'm doing that indeed. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring out some of my container strawberries that I had sheltered over the winter so that they can get real rain and full sunlight and a good watering. We're supposed to have rain for a couple of days while we're in these 50-degree temps, and this would be the perfect time for my plants, which are very much alive, to get not only some nitrogen but also to be rehydrated. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so they are very much alive here. Um, but the soil is extremely dry, even with your best efforts. No one really wants to water during the winter, but we need to. So I don't want to lose any plants, so I am going to take the time to water. And there we have it, overwintered strawberries. They're extremely hardy. So if there's a surprise drop in temperature, I can just throw some frost cover over them and they'll be fine. But that's another thing you can do. You can check on some of your potted plants that are overwintered and your perennials. So these are some of these early gardening tasks we can do while the weather is trying to level out and as we transition from winter into spring. And as I mentioned, in my zone, I'm 10 or 11 weeks away from my um, last frost date, and I do expect to have freezing temperatures again. But in this little lull, in this break, it's a perfect time to do some maintenance out in the garden. Maintenance is always a great thing. I wouldn't recommend planting at this time. So anything that has been overwintered in a container, you should just give it a good douse of water during these warm days to super hydrate it. All right. So another thing I like to do is check on the availability of compost. Now I've been adding to this all winter, and so my finished compost is actually mixed in with my unfinished compost. So I like to just kind of go through my pile and see what's available for use. And so that's another task you can do to scratch your gardening itch. It may mean adding additional materials, it may mean flipping your compost, but this is a great time to check on your compost piles. If you have a hoop house, greenhouse, row covers, and it's a beautiful sunny day, it might be the perfect time to just kind of air it out and allow fresh air to enter. This is also a great time to modify your spring planting plan. Just being out here, I realize that my in ground strawberries are truly high maintenance. This bed was so tangled in the summer with strawberries. I took out more than 70% of my strawberry plants in this bed, and I had to try to find homes, like putting them in other containers. I gifted them to people a lot. So I think I want a better way of growing strawberries. I think I will do only vertical growing of strawberries, and then I could top off this bed and use this bed for my leafy green vegetables, something like kale and mustard, something particularly kale that stands all summer long. So I'm also reevaluating my planting plan. So I will go back to my journal and see how many more plants I can add if I flip this bed into an annual bed as opposed to a perennial bed. So that's another thing you can do to scratch your garden itch. Reevaluate your planting plan and make sure that it makes sense. Make sure that you can get everything in that you want to grow. And this is the perfect time. If you need more space, there's time to build raised beds or add additional containers. Whatever you need to do, this is the perfect time to do it so that you don't cut your growing season short by putting in new infrastructure. So now is the time to do as much prep as you can so that you can truly enjoy your garden season and start the spring with a bang. Thank you so much for joining me in the garden. Have a great day. The Lord is good to all, and his loving kindness are over all his works.